Good evening. Can you hear me from the back? You okay? Clear? Okay. I just noticed that the slide, there's something wrong with the slide. Can anybody tell me what it is? Sorry? Yeah, this talk was supposed to give, like it was supposed to give last night, right? So that's the end of the talk. I'm going to talk to you about what indigenous people think and feel and understand, and the way scientific research is carried out. And I'm going to make a link. Hopefully I can make a good link between those two. Because in the scientific community, they're beginning to recognize the credibility of such indigenous knowledge. I call it epistemology, but simply knowledge, or the way people think. Indigenous communities, people have been living and growing up in the same place for hundreds of years. Where I come from, the core cultural values in our society are listed above, one of which is respect. That's very important in indigenous society. Interdependence and families are the very focal point of their upbringing. I come from a very large family. In fact, in my own family, it's about 50 people living in the same area, same place. Share the same fale or house to eat and have our prayers and have our meetings and so forth. So family, a very family-oriented society. And there's also a very caring society for the elderly people. So I found that in Utah, where I live, there's a lot of elderly people being sent to homes to be cared for. Where I come from, there's no such thing. So the family takes care of the elderly. It's part of the respect for the elderly people. There's a chiefly system that Kathy talks about, and I was fortunate enough to be endowed as a chief in my family. And the chief has stewardship over a family and land, those two things. And land is associated with names. So when I say the name Tavana, everybody knows where I come from, because there's no other place in Samoa where that name is. But when I came here, the name Smith or Kaluchi, is there another Kaluchi around? Oh, there's two of them right here. But you understand what I'm talking about, right? So the land is associated with name. Names and place always come together. The name Tofa, which is my other name, everybody knows the place where I come from. So there's no difference, there's no misunderstanding in that. Consensus, does anybody know what consensus is? I'm sure you do know. Anybody in the audience? Put your hand up. Yes, go ahead.
Do y'all agree?
Yeah. Whereas in our society here, it's more democracy. Samoan society is based on consensus. Everybody has to agree in deliberations, especially in matters concerning the welfare of the village or of the people in general. So everybody has to agree. And they sit in council until everybody agrees. So that's what consensus is in that society. Oops. I'm learning how to use this. So these are the 5 things I'd like to talk about tonight in this presentation. One of which is that the cultures and languages is a storehouse of indigenous wisdom, or indigenous epistemology. Secondly, loss of biological resources or biodiversity is a threat to the loss of also the survival of the indigenous wisdom. And I'm an advocate of the third one. Indigenous wisdom is a key to scientific discoveries. And I want to focus on that one in particular, because I have some great examples that illustrate what I mean, especially for that third component. Indigenous wisdom can be restored through local and other international collaborative efforts, especially with the education. So I list the education as the last part because, again, I'm going to spend a little more time on that. This is how the early Polynesians came about. If you study the history and geography, Polynesians started from 1100 BC from Tonga and Samoa. I'm not sure if I'm hands up those who have seen or heard or studied Polynesian before? Anyone? Good, then I'm safe. Okay. 1100 BC, they started from Samoa, and then they moved to the Central Polynesian, Cook Islands, Marquesas Island, and then the Easter Island, then Hawaii, and then finally to New Zealand. So that constitutes the Polynesian Triangle, and poly means many, all the other islands within that triangle, the Polynesian Triangle. And my presentation tonight is basically addressing the Polynesian community. My grandmother told me that, you know, your language and your culture comes from two sources. One is from the ocean, and the other one is from the land. Whaiva o le sami, ma whaiva o le vau, hunting and gathering in the ocean, hunting and gathering land. So all the languages, all the words, all the cultures associated with the Samoan culture and epistemology derive from those two primary sources. And I'll further explain this as we go along. By the way, I see you taking notes. If you want a copy of this presentation, Kathy, can you make it available to them too? That way they don't have to busy taking notes. And is that okay? Yeah, that will be made available by Dr. Colucci. And the language and cultures provide understanding of the biosphere because in the tropics where the Polynesians are, 80 to 90% of all the biodiversity exists in this area. 80 to 90%. That's an incredible high number in the biodiversity, all the biodiversity. I come to understanding that I asked my elders, I said, how do we know, how do we learn our language and cultures? And said, through participatory observation. In other words, there's no formal learning, there's no formal teaching where the parents come and sit you down and say, I'm going to teach you this. No, no such thing. But through daily experimentation, participatory observation, that's how the young people learn. This is an oral culture, this is an oral language. Nothing has been written down until the missionaries came late in about 1830. But everything was passed down typically by word of mouth, from generation to generations. So you have to watch your grandmother and listen to what she said and learn from her, because nothing has been written down. And still more will not be written down at all because of various reasons, which I will touch on later on. This culture here, the lady on the right, on my right, is showing one of, does anybody know what that is? No? Good. Then I have something to talk about. That's tapa, made from a plant called mulberry bush. You know what a mulberry bush is? Some biologists, some science students over here. Very small plant, about the width of that hole, and it grows as tall as the ceiling. And he used the bark to make that big tablecloth or a cloth that's used to as part of the clothing at the time, before the fabric material was introduced very late by the missionaries. The weaving on the left, also by bandanas. Bandanas is where they weave the mats, and the language that they use, and part of the culture. So you learn by observation, by participating, and by experimentation. I love this one. This is a group of my students I took to Samoa, and we went and watched how canoe making was done. And as they sail the canoes, they don't use any technology, any other means by which we do now, and paddling and using the stars and the sun and the wind, and they watch the wave. That's how they sail. They know it's going to be a fine day. Let's go fishing. So there's never recorded technology that they use for anything that they do. Epistemology, the way they understand it, the way they understand nature, the way they understand life. I call it also insights, or the way the deep feeling and understanding comes from within themselves, and maybe the attachment to nature, and maybe to God. There are two kinds of knowledges as we come to know. One is explicit knowledge. This is the kind of knowledge that you can easily pick up, easily can be taught quite easily and be understood. in class. You learn a lot of this in your classes. But there's another type of knowledge which is referred to as tacit knowledge, in which it's very hard to explain. For instance, what does respect mean? I cannot explain that until you see it yourself. So a lot of students have to travel all the way to Samoa just to observe and learn how that is and how that works. Because it's very difficult to understand if you try to teach it. So tacit knowledge is something that you have to understand it through intuition, insight, and perhaps participating in real life, in a real situation, such as taking the students to Samoa, as we have done in the last 15 years. And Dr. Colucci was one of our participants that went with us. This is a kava drinking ceremony. Has anybody tasted kava? How does it taste like? Bitter? Yeah. Anybody else tasted it? How did it taste?
It's like dirt.
Ah.
Dirt, yeah.
Wow.
Like sliced dirt.
Okay. Anybody else tasted it? Just those two guys? When I was in Florida teaching a course on kava, a medicinal course, and we had to have them a little sip, little cup, and then we teach the same class the next day, and guess what? Literally hundreds of people were lining up just to have to drink kava. But kava is made from the root of a plant. It's an underground organ of the plant, crushed and then mixed with water. And you're right, it tastes like dirt, but it's nice. Some people think that it has some kind of a problem with it, like a test was made in Germany. They said there's some toxic element associated with kava drinking, but nothing has been discovered of that. I still think it's a nice drink. But we use it in the islands in Polynesians for ceremonial purposes only. And this is one of the examples where Dr. Cox on the right and I were teaching a class and we were participating in a kava ceremony. The question is that really bothering a lot of people said, is this indigenous knowledge going to be disappearing forever? And let me show you some statistics associated with that. Oops. Here we go. There are 206,000 languages, indigenous languages in the world. And of the 6,000 languages in 1900, by the year 2000, 50% of those had disappeared. So that's how fast these indigenous languages and cultures is eroding. And of the 100 languages remaining, 80% are spoken by the elderly people and 20% by the children. In other words, there is a great threat that the languages and cultures will disappear. But I will show you some example that really shows how important and valuable indigenous understanding is. So, in America alone, North America, 300 languages, 280 are spoken by the elderly people, and 20 by the children. So you can see that it is a real threat to see that indigenous languages are disappearing really fast. By the way, if you feel like there's a question you need to ask, just raise your hand or just yell it out, okay? Okay. The second part of this is the third part of what I was really interested in talking to you about, is that indigenous knowledge is key to scientific discovery, and I'm going to talk about some examples which are very, very, very interesting that I share with you. The first one is ethnotaxonomy. What does the word ethno mean to you? Anyone? Don't all speak at once. Taxonomy? Anyone? Okay, that's good. Ethno means people, and taxonomy is the clarification, the categorization of plants or animals or whatever the case might be. Okay? So we went ahead with some of our students and find out how do the plants, this is a breadfruit. Breadfruit, so it's spread hanging on the tree, and when it's baked and roasted, it tastes like bread. breadfruit. It's a very popular, very common in the diet of the Polynesian people. Breadfruit. If you plant a breadfruit for 1 year, or one breadfruit for 50 years, it feeds your family for that amount of years with very little maintenance. That's how shows how popular that plant is, the breadfruit. Here is a collection in, who has been to Hawaii? Anyone to Hawaii? On the island of Maui. Maui? Okay. There's a collection done by the National Tropical Botanical Garden. 120 different varieties of breadfruit collected from all the Pacific Islands. 120. It's probably the largest collection of diversity of collections in one place. And so what happens is that we went to oh, I like this quote. Can somebody read this? Somebody from the back? Go ahead. Someone from the back. Someone from the front. Anyone? Go ahead.
If a man plants 10 breadfruit trees in his life, he would completely fulfill his duty to his own as well as future generations.
Wow. That tree alone can feed the family for 50 years. And my growing up there, we had a tree in front of our home. And I've been going back and forth, and it's still there, and still feeding our family. So that tree, breadfruit tree, can feed your family for many, many, many years. So what we're interested in when we took our students to Samoa is how do the Samoans name these plants, the breadfruit? What's in the name? That which we call a rose by any other name will smell as sweet, because you're familiar with that. So we're interested, how do these local elderly indigenous people name the breadfruit? We found out that prior to Linnaeus, there was a great confusion about how to name plants, and for those who are studying biology and science. And organisms were usually grouped in by common characteristics. Sometimes unrelated organisms are grouped together, such as this one. Such as this one. Yeah, that's how they grouped them together in those days. I like this one. Anyway, this was invented by Linnaeus and how they characterize and group plants. And if you notice that throughout the presentation is exactly the same way indigenous communities have used taxonomy. And I'll show you how. So this is how they use it. They use a binomial nomenclature. In other words, they use two names. The first name is the genus, Artocarpus for the breadfruit, and the second name is the species, the Ortalis. And this was used internationally, and of course, throughout your biology classes and botany classes, you come to understand how that is done. But the indigenous people use this. Look, the generic term ulu and the specific modifier is ma, so the two names, okay? Just as the Linnaeus had invented his taxonomy. And that's binomial. But if the breadfruit, if the generic term is understood, so you only use one name. Hence, it becomes a monomial. Is that coming clearer? Okay, so the first one, ulu ma'a, generic term is ulu, breadfruit, and specific modifier, which is a species, is ma, so ulu ma. However, if you use one name, such as maopo, which is a specific modifier, that means the generic name is understood. Okay? So we move on then? Okay, good. So this is how the data came out. The first name, I want somebody to read that first name. Ready, go. Ready, again, go. Very good, that's 70%. Very, very close, 70%. Try one more time, ma'afala. Try one more time, ready, go. 95%, pretty good. So ma'afala was ranked number 1. Okay? And UM means unambiguous. So it means it's a monomial, one name, because the generic term is is understood, okay? Go to the next one. Let's read it together. Ready, go. Ready, go. Some people say, po. Ready, go. Po. Excellent. Po, what does that mean? Um? Unambiguous monomial, okay? So in other words, we don't put the word ulu in front of po, okay? Because it's understood. The generic term is understood. We don't say ulpuo. We just say puo. That's one name. Let's go to a different one. Number 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Rank number 5. Let's read that name. Everyone? Okay. It must be an Elon thing. I'm just kidding. Uluwea. Okay. Tell me what the explanation is. I mean, the type is. AB. What does that mean? Now you should figure out. Sorry? Ambiguous. So it is binomial. 2 names. Okay? So it's ambiguous, binomial. And the explanation on the very right, or translation, means that ulu is from where? Uvea Island. Hence, it's called Uluwea. Let's go to one more. Number 7. Ready, go. You guys are choking. You guys are funny. Ulu Manua. Good, excellent. Ulu Manua. What is Ulu Manua? Tell me about it. Now you know. Ambiguous, binomial. Okay, because ambiguous, you have to use 2 names. And the explanation is, it is from Manua. That's the island of Manua. Do you get that? Okay, so that's how indigenous communities have used ethnotaxonomy to categorize the plants. And guess what? Linnaeus did the same thing. So in terms of indigenous epistemology, the way they understand how to do it, how did they learn that? How did they learn that? They have acquired that throughout the years of experimentation, participation, and observation. Now Linnaeus has learned it in the scientific world. Now you can see how those 2 things come together. That's what I'm trying to accomplish tonight. Let's go to another example. Here you go. We found out that most of the expert knowledge are very, very small. People who have the expert knowledge, those who have actually understood this pretty well, are very small. Whereas many of those who have not quite understood it still falls in the large number. So again, it's proving that the indigenous knowledge is disappearing really, really fast. Before the refrigerators were introduced to the islands, this is how they preserve their food. And they call it masi. They say breadfruit, as I said earlier, is that it bears fruits every year, all year long. And sometimes too much. And what they do is they clean up the breadfruit, dig a big hole on the right here, and bury them there for months and months. And they ferment the breadfruit there. And then they keep it there until they need it, particularly in times of famine. And when they dig it out after 6 months, 7 months, 1 year, it stinks like hell. But it tastes so good, just like the duck that I ate for dinner today. It's so nice. So they make bread out of it. They make dough and the bread, add a little bit of flour, a little bit of sugar, and put it in the oven, bake it. Comes out really nice. But when it comes out of the hole, it smells really bad. So they call it the masi. That's how they preserve the food culturally. And they do that with all other food. With this big hole, bury them there. It's clean, and you can use it as long as you want, the whole year, or more than a year. Okay. Now, this is a more scientific part that I'm getting into. Before, the indigenous community used to use plant material. They know exactly what to do. in order to get new plants, all you have to do is put a cut into this root here and there, and a new plant comes from that. So you can actually propagate more than 100,000 plants in one tree. That was the idea and the understanding. But now, in the work of Susan Murch, Dr. Murch in the University of British Columbia, she has used the term, the method of totipotency. Are you familiar with that? I know Kaluchi's class. Okay, go ahead, explain what that is.
Totipotency is where it can kind of transform into any sort of cell and fill any sort of function in the body.
Very good start. Can you help him finish that? Okay, good. Anyone else? You who raised your hand?
No, it was just on our test this morning, so I got excited.
Okay. You took a test this morning on that. This is where you took one single cell from the plant. Doesn't matter whether it's a leaf or a root or a trunk. Doesn't matter. And then propagate it using in vitro regeneration and mass propagate the plant. Now, did you know that every 4 seconds somebody dies of hunger? While we're sitting here talking, people are dying of hunger. So one way we were thinking of, particularly Susan Mertz and her work, how can we produce this breadfruit tree? Because it's low maintenance, it can grow anywhere in the tropics, and you can use it for 50 years or more or longer. What can we do to get these breadfruit trees out to the rest of the world so that we can make hunger problem become less problematic? So she came out with this idea of totipotency, and now we have literally thousands of little young breadfruit trees grown in Canada in her lab. And what's more interesting now that the cultivars, which is a company in California, take those plants and sell them or even give them out for free to places like Honduras in South America, in Africa, in order to help with the problem we have with hunger. So taking the idea of what the indigenous communities know, and now in the scientific community, you can see how these two come together. So I'm really excited about how those two things come together. Here's again the process as you see it, and this is happening in Canada. It can happen here too, Dr. Kaluchi, if you decide to do it. Many of those trees are now, this is the entire process. Many of these trees have been sent to the tropics for to help those people who have a hunger problem. Okay, the next example that I'm really interested in, and I think you'd be interested in too, is an understanding of how the plants are used for medicine. It's referred to as phytomedicine. And less than 10% of our plants have been studied. And if you, oh, what happened? Anyway, we took these students to the islands of Samoa and Tonga and Fiji and sat down with the local healer and asked them, how do you use these plants? What are these plants used for? And they tell us all these great stories about the plants are used for this, for that. We found out one with Dr. Paul Cox's work. I know if you're aware of him, world-renowned ethnobotanist. He discovered a prostratin from a plant that was given to her or told her by an elderly lady who sat in the Fale in the islands of Samoa. And she was saying that this plant is used for hepatitis. And he was interested in it, that he sent the extract material and for screening and found out that there's bioactivity in this plant for prostratin to cure HIV that causes AIDS. And that is now in its early stages of clinical trial. So let me, when the slides come up, and I'll show you some pictures of that. And it's interesting because there's some great stories and also some sad stories. In the islands of Madagascar, there's a plant called periwinkle, rosy eye. It's used to cure leukemia. And some company, pharmaceutical company, claimed the plant, patent it, and sell it for tons of money. And the knowledge, which is primarily from the islands, is not even recognized. So that's a sad story. But some more good stories coming in since the work of Dr. Paul Cox that I'm associated with and Dr. Colucci is associated with too, is doing right now. Did I do something?
I think the mouse is frozen.
Oh, the mouse is frozen. You know, close it and. Okay, anyway, but this is a good, even a better story. That when the National Cancer Institute, which isolated the prostratin, when they were told to patent the plant, the findings, Dr. Paul Cox said that it was not his findings. Whose findings was it? Who discovered the use of the plant? An elderly lady who was sitting in the Fale in Samoa and using the plants for hepatitis, right? Oh, good, thank you. So here is she. Knows that there are lots, 265,000 flowering plant species in the world. 85% depends on phytotherapy or the plants used for medicine. And only 25% of all prescription drugs are from plants, and less than 1% of plants have been studied. And the tropics is rich with these plants. So that's why South America, Brazil, the tropics, Samoa, Tonga, New Zealand, that area there, it's filled with rich, very rich with plants that have high activity for potential plant drugs and medicine. So over the years, the healers have experimented with plants, and let me back up. Okay, digitalis was found through William Hittering back in 1785, which used to reduce dropsy and reduce heart rate. Again, it's from the indigenous community in England, in Scotland. Another one, recipe, it's from India. It's used for hypertension. Another example is the island of Madagascar. I think I already spoke to you about it. From the rosy eye, rosy periwinkle, it's used for curing leukemia. But this is a sad story, as I said, that the pharmaceutical company have patented the plant material and the idea and have make money out of it. These are potential activities that we can use. Anti-inflammatory with the erythrine, the willy plant, which grows very wild in the tropics. And anti-Alzheimer's with the cycad plant, especially the study that was done in Guam. And also an antiviral is a plant I'm beginning to talk about. It's called Mamala homolanthus, as part of the work of Dr. Paul Cox in the islands. So here it is. This is a tauracea or a healer, prepares the treatment for hepatitis from the bark of the tree, and it's taken by the patient, and the patient is good, it's okay. And this is the prostratin that they discovered from that. When they sent the material to National Cancer Institute, and were able to isolate this bioactive material. And this is how it works. The ethnobotany, this is where I come in. There's a team of 6 or 7 of us all together, and the primary work, preliminary work in the ethnobotanical part of it is part of my work. And then the samples are sent, and using bioassays and fractionation, and they were able to isolate this structure, prostratin. And all of the work that Dr. Paul Cox has done, Dr. Colucci is also involved, and others, goes through a similar process. But this is what's more interesting, as I think. When they signed the patent, some of the compensation go back to the village, go back to the people that actually own the knowledge, and how the scientists have found it. This is the connection between indigenous epistemology, indigenous wisdom, and the scientific world. This is a an agreement that was signed by the Research Alliance and the Prime Minister of Samoa, an agreement that there will be compensation to the Samoan government, to the village where the work was being done, to the healers, of the families of the healers, and ARA. ARA is AIDS Research Alliance. So everyone that was involved is part of this compensation package. And of course, this prostratin does two things. One is that it exposes or prevents or protects the white cells that have been affected. And secondly, it goes in and exposes the cells that have been affected so that another drug can be used and to get rid of HIV, of AIDS altogether. And this has been widely publicized. And the problem was, if this comes to, if this is going to be working, there is a problem, right? What would be a problem? What do you think? Anyone? This plant, prostratin, where the drug will be used. We're going to use a lot of prostratin for AIDS. Problem will be? Sorry? Inventory, that's one. What's another one? What about the plant itself?
It's going to be depleted.
Yes, absolutely. It's going to be depleted. In fact, Samoa is so small that if we get the first shipment of the prostratin, the whole island would be shipped off. Okay, so what do we do? What do we do? Absolutely, and that's exactly what we're doing. Now we isolate, oh, he's ahead of me. So we isolate the gene, single gene, that generated the prostatin, the bioactive molecule, and then clone it in bacteria, and then mass produce the drug without cutting a single tree down. Smart. University of California, Berkeley is doing that for us because we believe that besides Elon, they are one of the best chemistry department in the world. I said besides Elon. Did I make that right? Okay, so that's the process, okay? Without cutting a single tree down, they select, they pick. It's going to take a while for them to actually find that gene, that single gene responsible for generation of the prostratin. So they're working on it right now, and hopefully they will find it, okay? So, and this is the agreement. They've made an agreement with the governments of Samoa. 50% will go to the government, the villages, and 50% will go to UC Berkeley, responsible for this part of the science project. And again, agreement was signed, and exactly as she was saying, it's good to have that because we'll save the over-harvesting and the repletion of the material, and we'll save the rainforest. Okay, this is what the conservation biodiversity has said about what we're talking about. If you're familiar with that, or if you need more information on that, I suggest that you look up the Conservation of Biodiversity, Convention of Biological Diversity. It says respect, preserve, and maintain the knowledge. And I'm talking about the knowledge, the very knowledge that we're talking about, the indigenous knowledge, indigenous wisdom. Innovations and practice of indigenous and local communities embodying traditional lifestyles relevant for conservation. Number 2, sustainable use of biological diversity and promote their wider application. And furthermore, the equitable sharing of benefits arising from the success of these. So everything on there, the 3 of those up there, are being followed by scientists such as Dr. Cox, Dr. Colucci, Sandra Bannock, and all of those working on these projects. Amazing. This is the interesting part. When we are in the islands, we're in the village, the students, the young kids are much more interested in what we're doing. We were in a little village. There's a little bulb called avapuhi to use for shampoo and what I'm thinking of, shampoo and conditioner together. And it's a little bulb that you grab it and you go into the ocean and wash yourself. And everybody does that every day. Now, if you know the company called New Skin, you're aware of New Skin company? Okay, it's based in Utah. They're selling that product, a little bottle. The last time I saw it was about $50. And from that little bulb, and again, the idea from indigenous community being worked by the scientists, and now they're making quite a nice profit out of it. This is a Samoan translation of what I just put there. Use of technology. One other interesting thing that we do when we take these students to the islands is that they learn how to use the technology like air layering and using of GPS mapping by these 3 local guys to make a map. And this is the map of my village in Samoa. And they had no idea that they have made something, they have created a map of the village. They've never seen a map of the village before, but now they know how to do that. So, as I said, we take a lot of groups to the islands and work on different groups, different projects. These are the other potential projects we're working on, like the Atuna racemosa and Ephrina variegata and Psychotria. This is a group from the University of Portland that I took about 3 years ago. They live in the village and study the expert knowledge of the indigenous communities. Making chocolate is a fun one. It's another class that we also teach. This is the University of Portland again. Students getting involved in the research. The young local guys who know more about our graduate students we take down help us identify the plant materials. And the most important thing that we do is that the work is being published. So every time a group goes down, they publish a research paper, peer-reviewed research paper, and it's an equivalent of 12 credit hours transferable to any university. So this is a couple of those that we've done in the past. Conservation. This is a canopy walkway 60 feet above the rainforest. It's a part of conservation to conserve the plants so that they can study more for their medicinal value. This is a good one. Who has seen a flying fox with a wingspan of about 6 feet? Nobody has seen that? We have another conservation project. You seen that? Where did you see it?
Not in person, but just through like books.
Oh, okay. Go. Yeah. It's a very delicious meat. But Dr. Cox has his work, the flying fox that eats cycad in Guam. They found out it causes ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, and Parkinson's disease. But these ones here are from Samoa. They feed on something else. So I've had a couple of those every month, and they're good. Until they told me not to eat them anymore, so I'm not doing that. But these are handsome-looking animals, mammals. They fly out at night, as you know, and then they sleep during the day. And they are key species in the recreation and regeneration of the rainforest. So that's why they preserve the flying foxes. And with all of that, education is very much the biggest component of all that we do, because we believe that in order to conserve what we love, we will love only what we understand, and we'll understand only things that we've been taught. And that's why the education component of what we do is very important. I'll stop there and I'll entertain some questions. I may have gone through this really fast, but I know you're good students, so you follow that very quickly.